How do I get my loved one with dementia to stop driving? Most of the common tips we hear on this are to take away the keys, disable the battery, give the car away, say the car is broken, and in some way try to force them to stop driving. And while those things may work for some people, typically they don't. And when the need that the person has is not met, most people will do some pretty dangerous things in order to still be able to drive or to get where they want to go on their own. And so in this video, we're going to talk about why those things don't work, what does work, and what you want to try first with your loved one. Welcome to Creative Connections in Dementia Care. I'm Reverend Katie Norris, and I am a trauma-informed, Montessori-based dementia care practitioner, and I have been working in dementia care for 14 years. I am also a family care partner, so my mom had Lewy body dementia, and we lived with her to help care for her, and now my dad has Alzheimer's. So first, I think it's important to understand that just because somebody has a diagnosis of dementia, it actually doesn't mean that they actually are unsafe to drive anymore. Now, in some states and in some countries, when somebody gets a diagnosis, a doctor is required to let the state or the country know. And so you want to make sure that you're following all the rules and regulations of where you live. But it is kind of a myth that if somebody has dementia, that they definitely cannot drive, because that's not always true, depending on how the memory impairment is presenting for them. So how do you know if your loved one is safe to drive? I think a lot of families don't want to address this. A lot of people with dementia don't want to address this because it's very, very scary to have your driving privileges taken away. But safety is always the most important thing. And so it's really, really helpful to actually go get a driving assessment from an occupational therapist. Just going to the DMV often is not enough, because a lot of times people can just pass the visual test or the written test, but maybe actually their driving is impaired because they are having slow reaction time and slow processing time. So you want to make sure that you're getting a full assessment to see if somebody is safe to drive or not. Now, let's say that somebody has been deemed unsafe to drive. A lot of times people have a very hard time giving up their ability to drive. And I think it's really important that we talk about that reason and logic often does not work in dementia, but also reason and logic often doesn't work when any of us feel threatened, when our brain feels threatened. So driving means a lot of different things to a lot of people. For some people, driving is independence. For some people, it's their ability to take care of their family because that's how they get to work and that's how they get paid. For other people, it is safety. If they come from a background where they experienced abuse and they only feel safe if they have a car so they can get out of the situation that they are in, it can be very, very scary to take away somebody's car in that situation. For other people, having the car means I can go see my grandkids, or maybe the biggest thing about driving for them is that they want to make sure that they go to that Wednesday coffee with their best friend. And so if you don't know the underlying need of what does having a car and having that independence and ability to get places mean to that person, you're gonna have a really, really hard time figuring out the right intervention that works for them to help them stop driving. So that's typically why things like just taking away somebody's keys or disabling the battery or giving the car away or saying that the car is broken doesn't work, because it doesn't kind of meet the need that the person has. And when the need that the person has is not met, most people will do some pretty dangerous things in order to still be able to drive or to get where they want to go on their own, because the frontal lobe is often impaired in dementia, which is where reason and logic lies. And their amygdala is more reactive. They're very scared. And so they're having a very hard time making reasonable and rational decisions. So if you just take away keys or disable a battery or get rid of a car for somebody who really has an attachment to driving, here are some of the things that we have seen people do, which are also just as dangerous and unsafe. So they will call rental companies and have a rental car delivered to their home. This is especially for people who actually still have a license. Maybe it hasn't been revoked yet, but you kind of know that they're not safe to drive and you're trying to stop them from driving by taking away their car. They call a rental company, they have their license, they rent the car, and then they get in an accident. Other people have then bought other forms of transportation, like a golf cart that they will then start to drive in the street. There's some like these mini cars that some places are saying are for people with disabilities, and we've had personal experience with this scamming elders with dementia and saying that these things are street legal and they're so easy to buy and all this kind of stuff, and so people will buy those and then try and drive them on the street. People also have done things like ride bikes, get electric bikes, try a motorcycle, and people are always like, oh, well, riding a bike should be fine, but not if they cross in the middle of a busy street and harm themselves or cause an accident that harms other people. Not if they get lost, not if they try and do it when it's icy out. So there's a lot of reasons why all of these options are unsafe still for your loved one and for the rest of the community. People always think that people with dementia won't be able to figure things out. But what's interesting about the brain is when it's scared, it has an uncanny ability, even in dementia, to try to figure out how to get something that it feels like it needs. Now, just like with all of us, we sometimes make really poor decisions when we are very, very scared, and it's very hard for us to be super logical. And so that's what happens with them as well. And they will start to think of ideas that can be more dangerous or just as dangerous, like running a car. Some people have asked neighbors to borrow their car. The neighbor doesn't know the person has dementia. Neighbor lets them borrow their car. They get in an accident. They might ask grandkids. Some people don't always tell all the family members and friends that their loved one has dementia. They take somebody else's car. There have been people that have tried to break into neighbors' homes or neighbors' cars to use their car. So some people, if you just take away their keys and say you can't drive anymore, it clicks for them and that works. But the majority of people with dementia, the stuff like taking away keys and disabling batteries and just getting rid of cars often doesn't work and causes other issues. Not only other issues of trying to find other ways to get transportation, but other issues of becoming more aggressive with you, and more combative and having more refusals and more troubles in care. And what people will tell you is, well, that's just dementia. That's just what happens. But it's not. It's really that the system that we are kind of using for care is causing a mistrust of us. We've already caused this mistrust with the car, and then they're not going to trust us with anything else either. And so they feel very abandoned and very angry more often with us. And that's really not the dementia. It's because we were not given the resources to use the right process to help somebody stop driving in a way that felt safe for them. Now, here's the thing. I wish that I had like one tip for you to tell you how to get your loved one to stop driving. And I don't, because dementia care is personalized. So I can give you some general tips. First thing is, especially in early stage dementia or even before somebody gets dementia, you want to start talking very early about what does having a car mean to you? What does driving a car mean to you? What does that independence mean to you? If you ever need to stop driving, what do you want to be able to do? Where do you want us to be able to make sure that we take you? And reiterate that you want to help, and you want to reiterate that you want to help them live the life that they want to the best of your ability. Do not make promises that you can't keep. You're not going to be able to say, anywhere that you want to go, I'll just drop everything and take you. You're not going to be able to live like that, and it's going to be too stressful for you. But you want to build trust, even with family members where we do have a lot of trust, or friends where we have a lot of trust. Losing all of this, losing your ability to drive, and this huge part of independence, and getting a diagnosis for dementia and getting a diagnosis of dementia for a lot of people is very, very, very scary. And so they, and so often we need to build trust around what is this new life going to look like, and build trust around that all these fear stories that they've heard about dementia, where family just comes in and takes everything away from you and doesn't even consider you, is not going to happen. That we want to know what kind of life that you want to lead. What are the things that you want to do? Where are the places that you want to make sure that you go? Who are the people that you want to make sure that you can see? What does driving a car mean to you? Are there any things about driving a car that might be important for us to know in terms of like a trauma background, like a car is safety to you? For some people, and actually I learned this when I was little, that if you go on vacation, you should always have a car in your driveway because then you won't get robbed. So like one tip for dementia is that sometimes the environment triggers us to do things. So sometimes if the car is there, someone sees the car and that's why they ask to drive. And so one solution could be that you remove the car. And so they don't see it and they don't ask to drive. However, if you are dealing with somebody who learned, like I did, that if there's not a car in the driveway, you're going to get robbed, then you're actually going to cause a different problem. And so that's why it's really important to know what works for the person, because these tips in general are great for thinking about, things in the environment trigger behaviors, but you also need to think about the person. And that's why we teach trauma-informed care, because you also need to know a lot about their background and what they learned, and if there's any trauma or anything scary that's happened to them, or any kind of rules around safety that they've learned, so that we can help meet them where they are and put in the right supports for them. So, especially in early stage dementia, and as early as possible, talk about driving. Should you need to not be able to drive? How would you like to be cared for? What would you like us to do? There's some options. Would you like us to give the car away to a family member? Would you like it to be donated somewhere? So a lot of times when people can make these decisions early, then we can help do something later that actually makes sense to their brain and feels more comforting to them. Now, does this always work? Not 100%, because they may have forgotten what they told you. Or if they believe that they are totally safe to drive, it won't matter that they've said, if I'm ever not safe to drive, you can give away my car for donation, because they still think they're safe to drive. But it's really important to have these conversations, because then what we're going to go for is, even if they feel like they're still safe to drive, we know all of these reasons why driving is really important to them and what that means. So we try to make sure that we meet those needs that they have, even though they can't drive right now. And so the more that we show that we're going to meet these needs that they have and the things that are really important to them, over time, people become more accepting of, well, I'm not driving anymore, and it's okay because I still have my needs met. And that's really, really, really important. Now, what if it's later stages of dementia and your loved one shouldn't be driving and you weren't able to have these conversations before? You want to look back at their life. You want to try and see if you can know more about your loved one with dementia. Where are the places that they typically went? Like, my dad is somebody who always likes to cook, and he was never somebody that like bought food early. He would go that day, get food to cook for that night. And so for him, that's like a really important ritual for him. So if that's something that's really important to him and he can't drive anymore, then how do we make that ritual happen as often as possible in a way that's accessible for us and for his care partners to be able to do that? Because it's the loss of that, or the loss of, like, he likes to go swimming, that could be the thing that's triggering him to really try and go out and get a car to drive. And if we meet those needs, then the need to drive isn't going to be as prominent. You can still ask them, where do you want to go? And you want to validate how they feel. So when they say they want to drive and they're fine to drive and all these things, you can say, I know that you feel like you are safe to drive. Where would you like to go? If you argue with them back and forth about how they're not safe to drive, they don't understand they're not safe to drive. You're just going to end in an argument, and that's not helpful. So you validate like their feeling. I think the thing that people kind of mess up in this is they think that validating means agreeing with them that they can drive. Like, oh yeah, Dad, I know you can drive. It's so unfair that that somebody's told you that you can't, but I know that you can. But since somebody's told you that you can't, how about I take you instead? Rarely does that work. We are reinforcing the idea that yes, you can still drive, and it's going to make the problem worse later. So it's more that it's really upsetting that you can't drive right now. I can see how that's really upsetting. That would be upsetting for me. And you want to validate the emotions, and then ask, where do you want to go? What kinds of things do you want to do? And try and figure out what that underlying need is. Now, driving is a big emotional need, and emotional memory generally lasts in dementia, even if kind of like the factual memory and things like that doesn't. So people often think that if you just kind of like get rid of a car, they'll forget that they ever wanted to drive. Or if you just say the car's in the shop, they just will be like, okay, and they'll forget that you ever said that. It could happen, and sometimes it does, but it's actually kind of pretty rare. And so often, if you're like, well, the car's in the shop, I'll take care of it. We've had people call every mechanic shop in the area and actually have like AAA come out to their house, and it's been a complete mess. So you do want to meet the person's reality. If it would make total sense to somebody that the car is in the shop, and they're like, okay, and then that's like works for them and they don't ask about it again, then that is a therapeutic lie that meets their reality, that works for them. If you tell them that and they go and call every mechanic, they ask you about it every hour, if they're still ruminating on it, then that did not work for them. And that's a sign that that approach isn't the right one for them. So again, you need to figure out the unmet need here, because if we just say that the car is in the shop, but their main need is that they go see their grandkids, they're going to keep focusing on the cars in the shop because I have this other need. So you really need to figure out what the need is, and we can try and meet it. Now, there are some more simple tips for a little bit later stage dementia. One of them is what we talked about before, which is like having the car visible all the time could just be triggering somebody to be like, I see a car, I'm supposed to drive somewhere. And so you might want to move the car to a different area. For other people, they really need to know that the car went somewhere important. So giving the car to a grandchild or to a nonprofit or something can be really helpful for people. A lot of times people will like keep the receipt from a nonprofit, and they'll talk about the car. A lot of times people think, oh, well, just don't talk about something with somebody with dementia and they'll just forget about it. And that does work for some people, but for other people where they do have like the strong attachment and emotional attachment to something, it is helpful for them to periodically know, where did my car go? And it's like serving this community and it's helping this family or it's helping my grandkids. And knowing that over time increases their comfort with what happened to their car. And eventually, most people actually do stop asking about it. For some people, having a note from the doctor, the DMV, or someone saying that they can't drive, written in very simple language, can be really helpful. Other people, though, everybody thinks just have the doctor tell them and then it'll be fine. There are so many people that think that the doctors don't know what they're doing. And so they are not going to believe the doctor or the DMV and things like that. So you can try that approach. And if it doesn't work, then that means it's not a right fit for your loved one. And like, how do you kind of think about these things before you try something? And that's what I want you to start thinking about with dementia care in general. If your loved one has always been a person who kind of mistrusts doctors, or maybe I see this often, they're a doctor themselves. And so their view is, I'm a doctor and I know, so I'm not going to listen to any other doctor. Or if they've always mistrusted doctors or authority figures, then that person with dementia, then we're probably not going to first try the tactic of, here's a note from your doctor who says you can't drive, because they're not going to believe it. If you know that that kind of stuff and information from a doctor works for them and has worked for them before they got dementia, then it is a great first thing to try. Now, let's say you absolutely need to stop your loved one from driving because it's unsafe, they do not have a license. That's when a lot of people are like, well, just do whatever because that's the safest thing, like take away the car, get rid of the keys, all that kind of stuff. But like we talked about before, they're probably going to do something else that's dangerous. But you still can't just like let people do unsafe things, right? Because it's a risk to them and to others. So usually these situations are a little bit more complex, and most often it's more complex because of somebody's personality before they got dementia. They might be one of those personalities that's like, I'm going to do what I want to do when I want to do it. Everybody else is kind of stupid. I make all my own decisions and nobody can tell me what to do. Like that kind of personality type tends to, some people it actually goes away in dementia, but often it tends to last. And those people are a little bit harder to work with. And so that's usually when I'm working with a family one-on-one, and I really try to listen to exactly what is going on to help them know what's the right way to approach not driving so that the person actually can accept that they can't drive anymore. But I know I'm not working with you right now. And also sometimes we don't find the right thing right away, and you do have to keep somebody safe. And so what you really want to think about is if you ever have to do something like that, it's not like my first go-to. It's usually not. I've actually never really had somebody who's had to do that because we usually find a different way. But I know that there are a lot of people who are like, well, nothing's working. So while you're figuring out what's going to work best for them, please at the same time, really, really try and hone in on what is their need right now and how am I going to keep trying to meet that. So do they really need to go somewhere that you are going to have to change your schedule to make sure that you can get there sometimes for a little bit so that they feel safe, that they're going to have their needs met? Is there this more need that a car means some sort of other kind of safety, and we need to show them that they can still have this other kind of safety even without having the car? So you might be kind of working on two things at once over time so that they feel more and more safe over time, so that even though the car is not there, they don't have the ability to drive anymore because you need to do something so that they can't drive, that the anger and the upset around not being able to drive will start to dissipate. And the last thing that I want people to understand is that our system is not very good. And so often we can't get help covered by insurance or Medicare or Medicaid for anything except that's not an ADL, so an activity of daily living. So unless a person has a hard time going to the bathroom, showering, or feeding themselves. But most people with dementia actually need care far earlier than that. So often what I see happening with the whole car issue is that you can't upend, some people can move in with their loved one and kind of be there and create a schedule where they get to go where they need to go and all that kind of stuff, and can be there more often. But a lot of families can't do that. And then they really don't have access to the additional care that would be needed to help with somebody who keeps wanting to go somewhere. So, because normally, really, the main fix for this is that we first make sure that we do get them where they need to go for things that are really, really important to them. The other thing is an engaged mind, a meaningfully engaged mind doesn't kind of wander and start to think of other things. And a lot of us actually, when we are bored or confused or distressed or don't know what we're going to do, we often think to go out and drive somewhere. Maybe I'm going to go to the store, maybe I'm going to go do something else because that seems more accessible. But if we were meaningfully engaged throughout the day, we wouldn't be thinking about getting in a car and going somewhere. And so the biggest problem I see in dementia care right now is that it's really hard to have a system set up where somebody, especially if they're living at home, and we have kept both of my parents at home throughout their course of dementia, so we understand how hard that is, that they are meaningfully engaged in a way that works for their brain. A lot of people don't understand what meaningful engagement means for somebody with dementia at different stages. And that is something that we teach, but that they have things that are meaningful for them to do throughout the day that guides them throughout the day, where they're not going to be asking about getting in a car, going somewhere and doing all these things all of the time. And so I encourage you, I know that there's not always a lot of help with hired care at different stages. If you can't afford to do that, it can be really, really, really helpful to have somebody be doing something with your loved one so that they don't kind of get confused or disoriented or like, I guess I'll just go out shopping or I'll go out and do this thing that I want because I don't have anything else to do, right? You can also enlist some friends and other family members to go and do things and come over and have a cup of coffee and have a conversation and do things with your loved one so that, again, they have more meaningful engagement. I know that the whole issue of being able to drive is really difficult. You know, even in my own family, my mom stopped driving very, very early. She was actually still allowed to drive, and she's like, "No, I don't want to. I still just think that my reaction time's not the same as it used to be, even though she tested as just fine to drive." Whereas my dad, it was very, very hard for him to really be able to understand that he can't drive anymore. And so we understand the complexities of these things. I wish this video could like hit everything and give you all the answers. But I hope that this gives you a place to start because we know how hard it is, and we hope that this helps you. I hope you found this video helpful. Please, if you did, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.